Some betrayals cut so deep they rewire your DNA. When my brother stole my inheritance and left me with nothing, he thought he'd won. He had no idea I'd been documenting every illegal move he made for 3 years. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by your own family and know what it feels like to watch someone you love destroy everything you've built together. My name is Kira. I am 32 years old, and I live in the coastal town of Millbrook, where the Atlantic wind carries both salt and secrets through narrow cobblestone streets. This is the story of how I learned that blood doesn't always run thicker than greed, and how sometimes the quietest revenge echoes the loudest. I used to believe in the mythology of family, growing up in our Victorian house on Seaview Drive, with its wraparound porch and garden that my mother tended like a sacred ritual. I thought we were unbreakable. My brother Nate was 5 years older, the golden child who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. I was the dreamer, the one who collected seashells and wrote poetry in notebooks I hid under my mattress. Our parents died in a small plane crash when I was 26 and Nate was 31. They were returning from a weekend in Martha's Vineyard, celebrating their 28th wedding anniversary. The inheritance they left behind was substantial, a successful accounting firm, 3 rental properties, and enough investments to secure both our futures. But more than money, they left behind a responsibility to take care of each other. The will was clear. Everything was to be split equally between Nate and me, with one stipulation. Since Nate had business experience and an MBA, he would manage the firm and properties for the first 5 years, ensuring stability before we made any major decisions. I would receive monthly distributions from the profits, and we would reassess the arrangement when I turned 31. It seemed reasonable. I was working as a freelance graphic designer then, building my portfolio and trying to establish myself in a competitive field. Nate had worked at their firm since college, knew all the clients, understood the systems. I trusted him completely. That trust would become the most expensive mistake of my life. For the first year, everything functioned exactly as planned. Nate sent me monthly payments of $4,000, kept me informed about major decisions, and we'd meet quarterly to review the books. The rental properties were doing well. The firm was stable, and I was finally able to focus on my design work without worrying about rent or groceries. Should have paid closer attention to the details. I should have insisted on being more involved. But grief has a way of making you passive, and I was still mourning our parents while trying to build something meaningful with my life. I wanted to honor their memory by succeeding on my own terms, not by micromanaging the brother they trusted with their legacy. The first red flag appeared in month 14. My payment was late by a week. When I called Nate, he seemed harried. Explained that one of the rental properties had needed major roof repairs and cash flow was temporarily tight. He'd have my money by the end of the week, plus a little extra for the inconvenience. Don't worry about it, I told him. These things happen, but they kept happening. Payments became irregular. $3,000 one month, $5,000 the next. Sometimes nothing at all, followed by a larger sum that was supposed to cover the gap. Nate always had explanations: unexpected expenses, late paying clients, seasonal fluctuations in the rental market, and he was so convincing, so genuinely stressed about letting me down, that I found myself comforting him instead of demanding answers. I was living in a small apartment downtown, pouring my energy into building my design business. I had landed a few good clients, enough to supplement the irregular inheritance payments, but I was nowhere near financial independence. I needed that money. More importantly, I needed to know that my parents' legacy was being protected. The breaking point came during a family dinner at Nate's house, the house that had been our parents' pride and joy, the one he'd purchased from the estate because he said it would be too painful to sell to strangers. I was admiring the renovations he'd done to the kitchen when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The cabinets were custom-made, clearly expensive. The countertops were imported marble. The appliances were high-end European models that cost more than most people's cars. I knew this because I priced similar items for a client's luxury home project. The renovations in that one room had cost at least $80,000. Beautiful kitchen, I said carefully. This must have cost a fortune. Nate's wife, Miranda, beamed. Nate surprised me with it for my birthday. He said business was so good he wanted to celebrate. Something twisted in my stomach. Business has been good? The best year we've ever had? Miranda continued, oblivious to the tension building in my chest. 3 new commercial clients. And the rental properties are booked solid. Nate's been working so hard, but it's finally paying off. I looked at my brother, whose face had gone pale. That's wonderful, I said. I'm sure the increased profits will be reflected in next quarter's distribution. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Miranda excused herself to check on dessert, leaving us alone in that gleaming kitchen that had been paid for with money that should have been mine. Kira, Nate began, but I held up my hand. I want to see the books, all of them, tomorrow. He nodded slowly. Of course, I've been meaning to schedule our quarterly review anyway. But when tomorrow came, Nate had a crisis, an audit by the IRS. That required his immediate attention. The books would have to wait until next week. Next week became next month. And next month became a pattern of avoidance that stretched through the summer. I started doing my own research. Public records showed that the rental properties were indeed fully booked, commanding premium rates that were significantly higher than what Nate had reported to me. The accounting firm had taken on several major clients, including a hospital system and a chain of restaurants. By every external measure, the business was thriving, yet my monthly payments had dwindled to almost nothing. I hired a forensic accountant named David Chen, a quiet man with wire-rimmed glasses who specialized in family financial disputes. I gave him power of attorney to access the accounts that should have been joint, based on the will's provisions. What he found made me physically ill. Nate had been systematically draining the inheritance for 2 years. Shell companies, fictitious expenses, salary increases that had no basis in reality. He bought himself a boat, a vacation home in the Hamptons, and had been funneling money into investment accounts under Miranda's name. The rental properties were profitable, but the profits were being diverted into personal accounts. The accounting firm was successful, but the success was being hidden behind layers of creative bookkeeping that would have made our CPA father roll in his grave. The total amount stolen was over $800,000. I sat in David's office, staring at the spreadsheets that detailed my brother's betrayal, and felt something break inside me, not just my heart, but something deeper, some fundamental faith in the world that I hadn't even known I possessed. What are my options? I asked. Criminal charges, David said without hesitation. This is theft, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. With this much evidence, the district attorney would have a strong case. And civilly? You could recover most of the money, probably, with punitive damages, but that would take years, and it would destroy your relationship with your brother permanently. I laughed, a sound that held no humor. I think he already took care of that part. I didn't sleep that night. I walked the streets of Millbrook until dawn, past the lighthouse where Nate and I had played as children, past the beach where our parents had taught us to build sandcastles. In search for perfect shells, I thought about forgiveness, about family, about the difference between justice and revenge. By morning, I had made my decision, but it wasn't the decision David expected, and it certainly wasn't the decision Nate was prepared for. I didn't file charges, I didn't sue. Instead, I began what I came to think of as my silent revenge. The first step was information. I spent the next 6 months documenting everything. Every fake expense, every diverted payment, every lie Nate had told me about the state of our parents' business. I photographed his boat, his vacation home, his wife's new jewelry. I tracked down the contractors who had worked on his house renovations and got copies of their invoices. I built a case so thorough that even the most skilled criminal defense attorney would have trouble poking holes in it. But I didn't plan to use it in court. The second step was patience. I continued accepting Nate's increasingly meager payments, continued playing the role of the trusting sister who didn't quite understand business, but knew her brother would take care of her. I let him think he was getting away with it. I let him believe that I was too naive, too dependent, too grateful for his management to ever question his decisions. Meanwhile, I was building something he couldn't see and wouldn't understand until it was too late. I'd always been good with computers, but I became obsessed with learning more. I took online courses in database management, digital forensics, and business analysis. I studied our parents' client files, memorized their business practices, and began to understand the firm in a way that even Nate, for all his MBA credentials, had never bothered to. I discovered that our parents had been more than just accountants. They'd been advisors, confidants, and, in some cases, the only thing standing between their clients and financial ruin. They'd built relationships based on trust, competence, and absolute discretion. Nate had inherited their client base, but he'd never understood what made them choose our family firm over the larger, more prestigious companies in the city. That understanding became my weapon. The third step was positioning. I started small, offering my design services to some of the firm's clients, logo updates, website refreshes, marketing. Materials, I was good at what I did, but more importantly, I was honest, reliable, and I genuinely cared about helping their businesses succeed. Word spread, referrals came in within a year. I had built a modest but stable client base that included several of the firm's most important accounts. I never badmouthed Nate. I never hinted at any problems with the firm. I simply did excellent work, delivered on time, and gradually became someone these business owners trusted and relied on. The fourth step was recruitment. I identified 3 key employees at the firm who were skilled, undervalued, and increasingly frustrated with Nate's management style. Sarah had been our parents' office manager for 15 years. Marcus was a CPA who joined the firm straight out of college and had been passed over for promotion twice. Linda was a bookkeeper who'd been doing the work of a senior accountant for years without the title or compensation. I didn't approach them directly. Instead, I made myself available. I listened when they complained about work over coffee. I offered sympathy when they talked about feeling unappreciated. I provided references when they mentioned thinking about looking for other jobs. I became their friend, their sounding board, their advocate, and slowly, carefully, I began to plant seeds. You know, Sarah, you understand the clients better than anyone. You've been taking care of them for 15 years. Have you ever thought about starting your own firm? Marcus, your expertise in tax law is incredible. I bet a lot of small businesses would pay well for that kind of specialized knowledge. Linda, the way you caught that error in the Johnson account last month that saved them thousands, they don't appreciate what you do here. I never suggested they leave. I never criticized me or the firm. I simply helped them see their own value, their own potential, their own options. The 5th step was timing. I waited until Nate made a mistake. That was too big to hide. It happened in the spring of my 30th year. One of the firm's largest clients, a regional hospital system, discovered discrepancies in their quarterly reports, the kind of discrepancies that suggested either incompetence or fraud, the kind that could result in federal investigations, massive fines and criminal charges. Nate had been sloppy, whether from overconfidence or genuine lack of skill. He'd cut corners on the hospital's account, delegating work to junior staff without proper oversight and signing off on reports he hadn't thoroughly reviewed. When the hospital's internal audit team found the problems, they demanded answers. I knew about the crisis before Nate did. Linda had called me, upset and frightened, unsure what to do. The hospital was threatening to terminate their contract and was considering legal action. The firm's reputation was on the line. Everything our parents had built was at risk. What should I do? Linda asked. I tried to tell him there were problems months ago, but he said I was overthinking it. You need to protect yourself. I told her, document everything. Make sure you have copies of all your communications, all your attempts to flag the issues, and then you need to decide if this is the kind of place you want to work. She was quiet for a long moment. I've been thinking about what you said about starting something new. Have you? There's a small business incubator downtown. They help people start accounting firms. I looked into it last week. I felt a flutter of excitement, but kept my voice calm. That sounds like a wonderful opportunity. Would you consider doing the design work? If I actually go through with it, I'd be honored. That conversation happened on a Thursday. By the following Tuesday, Linda had given her notice. Marcus followed on Wednesday. Sarah waited until Friday. then submitted her resignation along with a detailed memo outlining all the problems she'd observed with the firm's management over the past 2 years. Nate called me that evening, his voice shaking with rage and panic. "Did you know about this?" He demanded. "Know about what?" "My staff, they all quit. All of them." In the same week. "Oh no," I said. "What happened?" "I don't know. They said they were starting their own firm. They said they wanted to get back to the kind of personal service mom and dad used to provide." Something cold settled in my chest. "Are you saying they criticized mom and dad?" "No, they criticized me. They said I'd lost sight of what the firm was supposed to be about. I'm sure they didn't mean it personally. The hell they didn't. And the timing is suspicious. Right when I'm dealing with this hospital crisis." "What hospital?" "Crisis?" The silence stretched long enough that I could hear him breathing. Nothing, just some bookkeeping issues, nothing I can't handle, but he couldn't handle it. Without Sarah to manage client relationships, Marcus to handle the complex tax work, and Linda to catch the errors before they became problems, the firm began to hemorrhage accounts. The hospital terminated their contract and demanded a full audit of their books. Other clients, hearing whispers about instability and quality issues, began shopping around for new accountants. Within 6 months, the firm had lost 60% of its client base. I, meanwhile, had become the go-to designer for small businesses in Millbrook. Sarah, Marcus, and Linda had indeed started their own firm, Miller, Chun and Associates, and they were thriving. They'd taken many of the firm's former clients with them, offering the kind of personal, detail-oriented service that our parents had been known for. And I was their silent partner, not officially, of course. I was just their graphic designer, their marketing consultant, their friend who helped them navigate the challenges of starting a new business. But I provided the seed money for their startup costs, helped them develop their business plan, and used my growing network of contacts to steer clients their way. I'd also done something else, something that Nate wouldn't discover until it was too late. I'd been slowly purchasing the debt on the rental properties. This was the most complex part of my plan, and it required help from David Chun, who had become more than just my forensic accountant. He'd become my strategic advisor, my financial planner, and eventually my closest confidant. David understood what I was trying to do, and he respected the elegance of it. "You're not just getting revenge," he told me during one of our planning sessions. "You're correcting an injustice. There's a difference." Nate had mortgaged the rental properties to fund his lifestyle. Big mortgages, with variable interest rates that he'd assumed would stay low forever. When the rates began to rise, he'd refinanced, taking out even more equity to pay for the boat, the vacation home, the kitchen renovations. The mortgages were held by a small regional bank that was struggling with its own financial problems. Through a series of carefully structured transactions involving several investment entities that David helped me establish, I began purchasing the bank's distressed assets, including the mortgages on my parents' rental properties. It took 2 years and most of my savings, but eventually I owned the debt on properties that were worth almost $2 million. Properties that Nate had been treating as his personal piggy bank, but which legally belonged to both of us. Final step was revelation. I chose the 3rd anniversary of our parents' death. Nate had suggested we meet at their graves to remember them and discuss the future of their legacy. He'd been growing increasingly desperate as the firm continued to decline, and I suspected he was finally ready to have an honest conversation about our financial situation. We met at Millbrook Cemetery on a crisp October morning. The maple trees were brilliant red and gold, and the ocean was visible in the distance, sparkling like scattered diamonds. Our parents' headstone was simple granite, engraved with their names and the words "Together Always." "I've been thinking about what Mom and Dad would want," Nate began, his voice heavy with emotion, "about what they'd say if they could see us. Now, I placed a bouquet of white roses on their grave mom's favorite flowers. What do you think they'd say?" "I think they'd want us to be honest with each other, to face our problems together instead of pretending they don't exist." "What problems are we pretending don't exist?" He looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw something crumble in his expression. "You know, don't you?" "About the money. I know you've been stealing from me for 3 years." The words hung in the air like a physical presence, Nate's. Face went through a series of changes: surprise, denial, resignation, and finally, a kind of desperate relief. I was going to pay it back. He said, all of it, I just needed time. $800,000, Nate. You stole $800,000 from your own sister. I borrowed it. You were going to what? Keep lying to me? Keep pretending the business was failing while you bought boats and vacation homes. I panicked. The firm was doing well, but I made some bad investments. I thought I could make it back quickly before you noticed. Before I noticed that you were stealing my inheritance? It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I was trying to protect you from what? From having to worry about money, from having to understand the complexities of running a business. Dad always said you were too trusting, too naive about financial matters. The casual cruelty of it, the way he twisted our father's protective instincts into justification for his betrayal, made me feel like I'd been slapped. So you decided to prove him right by stealing from me. I was trying to take care of you. By taking care of yourself first, we stood there in the cemetery, surrounded by the graves of people who had loved, lost, and been forgotten, and I felt the weight of 3 years of careful planning settling on my shoulders. It was time. I want to show you something, I said, pulling out my phone. I opened the folder I'd labeled Silent Revenge and showed him the first document. This is a complete accounting of everything you've stolen from me. Every fake expense, every diverted payment, every lie you've told me about our parents' business. His face went white. Kira, I'm not finished. I scrolled to the next document. This is a forensic analysis of the firm's actual financial performance over the past 3 years. Would you like to guess how much profit you've hidden from me? Please, $1.2 million. That's how much you've stolen from me. Nate, not 800,000, 1.2 million. I watched him process this information. Watched him realize that I wasn't the naive little sister he'd been manipulating. I was someone who had spent 3 years building a case against him. Someone who had documented every aspect of his betrayal with the kind of thoroughness that would have made our accountant father proud. What do you want? He asked finally. I want justice. I showed him the next document. This is a notice of default on the mortgage for the rental properties, the mortgages that you've been using to fund your lifestyle. I don't understand. I own your debt, Nate. I've been buying it piece by piece for the past 2 years. The bank sold it to me at a discount because they needed the liquidity, and I was offering cash. That's not possible. It's not only possible, it's legal. David Chen structured the transactions through several investment entities, but ultimately, I own the mortgages on properties that should have been mine to begin with. You can't just foreclose on them? Actually, I can. The mortgages are in default because you've been diverting the rental income instead of making payments. I have the right to call the loans immediately. The properties are worth more than the mortgages. They were but property. Values have dropped, and you've let the maintenance slide. The beach house needs a new roof. The downtown property has plumbing issues, and the apartment building hasn't been painted in 5 years. I've had them appraised recently, I showed him. The appraisal reports, combined, they're worth about $2.1 million. The outstanding mortgages total $1.8 million after foreclosure costs, legal fees, and back taxes. You'll be left with approximately $50,000. You're destroying our family. I'm correcting an injustice. There's a difference. What about the firm? What about Mom and Dad's legacy? The firm is dying because you killed it. You chose profit over service, shortcuts over quality. Personal gain over professional integrity. Sarah, Marcus, and Linda are building the kind of firm our parents would have been proud of, and you're helping them. I'm doing business with them. They're excellent at what they do, and they treat their clients with respect. Novel concept. I know. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at our parents' headstone. So what happens now? Now you have a choice. You can fight me in court, where all of this will become public record. The district attorney will probably be interested in the evidence I've gathered. Your friends and neighbors will know exactly what kind of person you are. Miranda will find out about the affairs. What affairs? The ones you've been having with the real estate agent who helped you buy the vacation home. And the accountant from the firm downtown, I have photos, credit card records, hotel. Receipts? Should I continue? His face crumpled. How did you? I've been watching you for 3 years. Nate, I know where you go, who you see, what you do. I know about the gambling debts, the cocaine habit, the fact that you've been stealing from client accounts to cover your losses. You're lying. I'm thorough. There's a difference. I pulled out another document. This is your other option. You sign over your portion of the inheritance to me. Immediately, you transfer ownership of the house, the firm, everything. In exchange, I don't file criminal charges. I don't pursue civil damages, and I don't tell Miranda about your extracurricular activities. You can't ask me to give up everything. I'm not asking. I'm offering you a choice between everything in prison. This is extortion. This is justice. You took everything from me, and you did it slowly, methodically, over years. You looked me in the eye and lied to me about our parents' legacy while you were destroying it. You made me doubt my own judgment, my own worth, my own right to the inheritance they left me. I never meant. You meant every bit of it. You planned it, you executed it, and you would have continued if I hadn't stopped you. He looked at the documents in my hands, then at the headstone, then back at me. If I sign this, what happens to me? You get to start over with nothing, just like you left me. But you get to start over as a free man with your marriage intact and your reputation, relatively undamaged. And if I don't, then I destroy you as systematically as you destroyed me. The only difference is that when I do it, it will be legal. The October wind picked up, scattering leaves across the cemetery. I could hear the ocean in the distance. The eternal rhythm. That had been the soundtrack of our childhood. I thought about the girl who used to collect shells on that beach, who believed in the mythology of family, who trusted her big brother to protect her. That girl was gone. In her place stood someone harder, smarter, more dangerous. Someone who had learned that survival sometimes requires you to become the very thing you once feared. I need time to think, Nate said finally. You have until tomorrow at noon after that. I file the criminal charges and begin foreclosure proceedings. He nodded slowly. Can I ask you something? What? Was any of it real? The quarterly meetings, the conversations about the business, the way you seemed to trust me, was any of it real? I considered the question. For the first year, it was real. After that, it was research. And now? Now it's over. I left him standing at our parents' grave, holding documents that detailed his betrayal and ultimatum that would determine his future. I drove home to my apartment, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat on my balcony watching the sun set over the ocean. My phone rang at 11:30 that night. It was Nate. I'll sign, he said without preamble. Smart choice. I have conditions. You're not in a position to make conditions. I want to keep the house. It was Mom and Dad's house. It should stay in the family. You mortgaged it to buy a boat. It's not yours anymore. Then buy it back. Add it to the settlement. Keep it in the family. I was quiet for a moment. The house held memories for both of us. Good memories from before everything went wrong. I'll consider it. And I want you to know that I'm sorry. I know that doesn't change anything, but I want you to know. Sorry you did it, or sorry you got caught? Both, but mostly sorry I did it. I became someone I don't recognize. Someone Mom and Dad would be ashamed of. Yes, you did. Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? I thought about forgiveness, about family, about the difference between justice and revenge. I think someday I might be able to forgive you, but I'll never trust you again. I understand. And Nate? If you ever try to contact me again, if you ever try to manipulate me or anyone else I care about, I'll release everything. The photos, the financial records, the evidence of your affairs. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are. I understand. Good, we'll meet at David Chun's office tomorrow at noon to sign the papers. I hung up and finished my wine. 3 years of planning, 3 years of patience. 3 years of silent revenge were finally coming to an end. The next morning, I drove to David's office in downtown Millbrook. It was a beautiful building, renovated from a 19th century bank. With high ceilings and tall windows that looked out over the harbor, Nate was already there when I arrived, sitting in the conference room with his attorney, a nervous-looking man who clearly wished he was anywhere else. The signing took less than an hour. Transfer of ownership for the house, the firm, and all remaining business assets. Assumption of all debts and liabilities. A comprehensive non-disclosure. Agreement that would prevent him from discussing the settlement or the circumstances that led to it. When it was over, I owned everything that had been stolen from me, plus interest, plus the satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served. There's one more thing, I said as we prepared to leave. I handed Nate a cashier's check for $50,000. This is for Miranda. She doesn't deserve to suffer for your mistakes. He stared at the check. Why would you do this? Because someone has to be the better person, and it's clearly not going to be you. He took the check with shaking hands. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank Miranda. She's the only reason you're getting this. I left him sitting in that conference room, holding a check that represented more kindness than he deserved, and less money than he'd ever imagined he'd have to survive on. 6 months later, I was living in my childhood home, renovating it with the same care and attention our parents had given it. I kept Sarah, Marcus, and Linda's firm as my accountants, and they were managing the rental properties with the kind of integrity that made our parents' legacy proud. The firm that had been our family's pride and joy was officially dissolved. I donated the client files to Miller, Chen, and Associates, ensuring that the people who had trusted our family for decades would continue to receive excellent service. Nate had moved to Florida with Miranda, who never learned about the affairs or the theft. They were renting a small apartment near the beach, and according to the private investigator I'd hired to monitor the situation, Nate was working as a bookkeeper for a small restaurant chain. He wasn't stealing, wasn't gambling, wasn't cheating on his wife. He was, by all accounts, trying to rebuild his life with the humility that comes from losing everything. I found I didn't hate him anymore. I didn't love him either. But the consuming anger that had driven me for 3 years had burned itself out, leaving behind something that felt almost like peace. My design business was thriving. I bought a small studio space downtown, hired an assistant, and was working on projects that challenged and excited me. I was dating David Chen, who had turned out to be not just an excellent forensic accountant, but also a kind, intelligent man who understood the difference between justice and revenge. I'd also started volunteering at a legal aid clinic, helping people who had been financially abused by family members. It was surprising how common the problem was, how many people had been betrayed by the people they trusted most. I couldn't save them all, but I could help them understand their options, help them build cases, help them find the strength to fight back. One evening, as I was working late in my studio, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it, but something made me pick up. Hello, I said. Is this Kira? The voice was young, female, scared. Yes, who is this? My name is Jessica. I got your number from the legal aid clinic. I think my stepfather is stealing from me. I set down my pen and gave her my full attention. Tell me what's happening. As she told her story, a familiar tale of trust betrayed, inheritance stolen, family loyalty exploited, I felt that old familiar anger rising in my chest. Not for myself this time, but for her, for all the people who had been taken advantage of by those who were supposed to protect them. What should I do? She asked when she finished. First, document everything. Every transaction, every conversation, every lie. Second, get a forensic accountant to examine the records. Third, remember that you're not powerless. You have options, but he's family. Family doesn't steal from family. What he's doing to you isn't about love or protection. It's about greed and control. I don't know if I'm strong enough to fight him. You're stronger than you know, and you're not alone. After I hung up, I sat in my studio looking out at the harbor where I'd played as a child, where I'd learned to trust the rhythms of the ocean and the reliability of the tides. I thought about the girl I'd been and the woman I'd become, about the price of justice and the cost of revenge. I'd gotten everything I wanted. I'd reclaimed my inheritance, restored my parents' legacy, and ensured that Nate would never be able to hurt me again. But more than that, I'd learned something about myself. I discovered that I was capable of patience, strategy, and a kind of cold-blooded determination that I'd never known I possessed. Some people might call what I did cruel, others might say it was justice. I knew it was necessary. Sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to become something they fear more than they fear consequences. I've become someone who fought back, someone who protected not just herself, but others who found themselves in similar situations, someone who understood that silence isn't always golden, that sometimes it's complicity. My phone buzzed with a text message from David. "Dinner tomorrow?" I found a new place that serves amazing seafood. I smiled and typed back, "I'd love to." Life was good. Not perfect, not without its challenges, but good. I built something meaningful from the wreckage of my family's betrayal. I'd found love. With someone who understood me, work that fulfilled me, and purpose that went beyond my own needs, most importantly. I'd learned that revenge doesn't have to be loud or dramatic to be effective. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply refusing. To remain a victim, refusing to let someone else's betrayal define your future. I called my approach silent revenge because it was methodical, patient, and ultimately more devastating than any dramatic confrontation could have been. I'd let Nate destroy himself while I built myself up. I'd let his lies and greed create the very evidence I needed to defeat him. The girl who used to collect shells on Millbrook Beach was gone, but in her place stood someone who understood that the ocean's power comes not from its storms, but from its relentless, patient erosion of even the strongest rocks. Some betrayals cut so deep they change your DNA, but sometimes that change makes you stronger. 3 years had passed since the October morning in the cemetery, 3 years. Since I watched my brother sign away everything he'd stolen from me, everything he thought he could take without consequence. 3 years since I'd learned that family loyalty is not a one-way street, and that sometimes the people who claim to love you most are the ones most willing to destroy you. The legal aid clinic had grown. What started as me volunteering a few hours a week had become a full-time passion project. I hired 2 attorneys, a paralegal, and a victim advocate. We specialized in family financial abuse, helping people who had been betrayed by spouses, siblings, parents, children. The stories were heartbreakingly similar: trust exploited, inheritance stolen, financial futures destroyed by the very people who were supposed to protect them. Jessica, the young woman who called me that evening 3 years ago, had become our first major success story. Her stepfather had been stealing from a trust fund her mother had left her. Using his position as trustee to funnel money into his own accounts, we'd helped her build a case, recover her inheritance, and send him to prison for fraud. She was now in law school, planning to join our clinic after graduation. "You saved my life," she'd told me at our last meeting, and was ready to give up, to let him win. "You saved your own life," I'd replied. "I just showed you the tools." The clinic had handled over 200 cases in 3 years. We had a success rate of 87%, and more importantly, we had a reputation. Word had spread through the legal community, through social services, through the network of people who worked with victims of financial abuse. We were known as the place where people could go when their own family had betrayed them. I'd also expanded my design business, focusing on clients who were starting over after financial trauma. There was something deeply satisfying about helping people rebuild their visual identity, their brand, their sense of self after betrayal. I understood what it felt like to have your foundation ripped away, to have to reconstruct your entire sense of reality. My relationship with David had deepened into something I'd never expected to find. We moved in together 6 months ago, combining our households in the Victorian house where I'd grown up. He'd set up his home office in what used to be Nate's bedroom, and I converted the sunroom into my design studio. We were planning to get married in the spring, a small ceremony on the beach where my parents had exchanged vows 35 years earlier. "You know what I love about you?" he'd said to me the night before, as we sat on the front porch watching the sunset. "You turned your pain into purpose. You could have let what Nate did to you make you bitter, but instead you used it to help other people." I did let it make me bitter, I'd admitted. For a while, but bitterness is exhausting. purpose is energizing. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you just confronted him directly? If you'd skipped the whole 3-year plan and just demanded your money back? I considered this question many times. He would have denied it, made me doubt myself, probably would have found a way to hide more money before I could prove anything. The methodical approach wasn't just about getting revenge, it was about making sure he couldn't do it again. And now he's learned that actions have consequences, that you can't just take what isn't yours and expect to get away with it forever. I'd kept tabs on Nate over the years, not out of obsession, but out of caution. The private investigator I'd hired had become a friend, and he sent me quarterly reports on my brother's activities. Nate was still in Florida, still working as a bookkeeper, still married to Miranda. They'd had a daughter 2 years ago, a little girl named Emma who looked exactly like our mother. The reports painted a picture of a man who had learned humility. The hard way, he worked regular hours, lived within his means, and had apparently stayed faithful to his wife since the move. He'd joined a support group for people with gambling addictions and had been clean for over 2 years. He volunteered at a local food bank on weekends. It wasn't the life he planned, but it was an honest life. Maybe the first honest life he'd lived since our parents died. I'd also kept tabs on Miranda, who had no idea what had really happened to their fortune, as far as she knew. Nate had made some bad investments, and they'd had to downsize. She'd adapted to their reduced circumstances with grace. Getting a job as a teacher's aide and throwing herself into community activities, she seemed happy, or at least content, and that mattered to me. Emma was the wild card. She was 3 years old, with our mother's dark hair and our father's green eyes. She would grow up without the wealth that might have been hers, but she would also grow up with parents who understood the value of hard work and honesty. In some ways, Nate's downfall might have been the best thing that could have happened to her. I never contacted any of them. The settlement included a non-contact clause that worked both ways. I couldn't reach out to them, and they couldn't reach out to me, but I'd made provisions for Emma in my will, a trust fund that would become available when she turned 25. She was innocent in all of this, and she deserved to benefit from our parents' legacy, the anniversary of our parents. Death had become a day of reflection rather than mourning. David and I visited their graves every year, bringing fresh flowers and updating them on our lives. I told them about the clinic, about the people we'd helped, about the difference we were making in the world. I told them about David, about our plans for the future, about the family we hoped to build. I also told them about Nate, about the man he'd become after losing everything. I thought they would be proud of his transformation, even if they would be disappointed in the path that had led to it. This year, as we stood in the cemetery on that crisp October morning, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace with my decision. Not satisfaction, not triumph, but a deep, quiet peace that came from knowing I'd done what was necessary to protect not just myself, but others who might have been hurt by Nate's actions. Do you think he'll ever try to contact you? David asked as we walked back to the car. I don't think. So, he knows better than anyone what the consequences would be. But if he did, I considered the question. I think I'd listen, not because I trust him, but because I'm curious about who he's become. People can change, even people who do terrible things. Would you forgive him? I think I already have, in a way, not because he deserves it, but because holding on to anger was poisoning my life. Forgiveness isn't about him, it's about me. And if he wanted a relationship again, that's different. Forgiveness doesn't require trust, and trust, once broken the way he broke it, can never be fully repaired. We drove home in comfortable silence, past the lighthouse where we played as children, past the beach where our parents had taught us to build sandcastles. I thought about the girl I'd been, the woman I'd become, and the people I'd helped along the way. That evening, I was working late at the clinic when I got a call from our answering service. A woman in California needed help her son had been stealing from her retirement account, and she didn't know what to do. She was 73 years old, alone, and terrified of losing everything she'd worked for. I called her back immediately. This is Kira. I understand you're having some problems with your son. I don't know where else to turn, she said, her voice shaking. He's my only child. Want to believe he would do this to me? Tell me what's happening." As she told her story, another familiar tale of trust betrayed. Another family member who thought love meant never having to face consequences. I felt that old familiar fire. In my chest, not anger this time, but determination, purpose. What should I do? She asked when she finished. First, you need to know that you're not alone. Second, you need to understand that what he's doing is not about love. It's about control. Third, you need to document everything. But he's my son. Being your son doesn't give him the right to steal from you. Family isn't about blood, it's about behavior. And his behavior is telling you exactly who he is. I don't know if I'm strong enough to fight him. You're stronger than you know. And you don't have to fight him alone. After I hung up, I sat in my office looking out at the harbor where I'd learned to love the ocean's rhythms. I thought about the network we'd built, the people we'd helped, the difference we were making in the world. I thought about the girl who used to collect shells on the beach, who believed in the mythology of family, who trusted her big brother to protect her. That girl had grown into a woman who understood that protection sometimes means fighting back. That silence isn't always golden. That sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply refusing to remain a victim. I called David. "I'm going to be late tonight. We just got a new case. Bad one? They're all bad, but we'll help her." That's what you do. That's what we do. I hung up and got back to work. There were files to review, strategies to plan, people to help. There was justice to be served. One case at a time. Outside, the ocean continued its eternal rhythm, patient and relentless, wearing away even the strongest rocks. Inside, I continued my work, methodical and determined, helping people reclaim what had been stolen from them. Some betrayals cut so deep they change your DNA, but sometimes that change makes you stronger. Sometimes it makes you into exactly the person the world needs you to be. The girl who used to collect shells on Millbrook Beach was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that the ocean's power comes not from its storms, but from its relentless, patient erosion of even the strongest defenses. Someone who had learned that silent revenge isn't about destruction, it's about transformation. I transformed my pain into purpose, my betrayal into justice, my silence into strength, and in doing so, I discovered something I never expected. That the most powerful revenge isn't about hurting the people who hurt you. It's about becoming someone they could never break. Have you ever been betrayed by the people closest to you? Share your story in the comments. Someone out there needs to hear it. Remember, you're stronger than you know, and you don't have to face your battles alone. Sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal isn't confrontation, it's transformation.